Hello, welcome back to All For United WFC. Apologies for that, a little bit later, and everything else. It's a couple of bit of changes as well to the thumbnail, I know. I'm sure you would have noticed. So we're going to get into, there's so much to talk about. It's been international break, as everyone knows, but there's been a lot of news, obviously, with the WSL, the Champions League, the Nations League, and obviously United. It's getting into closer to January, transfer season's hotting up, and the WSL is back this weekend as well. So we will do our proper Spurs preview on Friday, but obviously we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So Jess obviously is with me ever, co-host on Wednesday nights, and Emily, thanks for coming back on. I was going to say fresh face from Scotland, but it's been quite cold up there, right? I don't know how cold it was, but I can imagine quite a cold night in Glasgow for you yesterday.
Yeah, it was like -1 degrees. It was very, very cold. I thought Wembley was bad on the Friday before, but no, last night was very cold. And yeah, if you know, trains in the UK obviously don't run very well, so very long journey back, but made it back and finally home. So yeah, not too bad.
Glad to hear. And we're going to get into the Nations League. If you have seen this week, we've got so much to cover. So we are going to start with the government's response to Karen Carney's review. So we're going to dive into that a little bit to start with. Last week, we're going to cover the Champions League and Nations League, and obviously a bit about United towards the end as well. Emily, I'll just throw it to yourself in terms of the government made the response. I think it was 2 days ago now, a couple of days ago. Is there anything that stood out for you in that? Obviously, we know that I think they've pretty much said yes to all of it, agreeing to everything that Karen Carney suggested. Is there anything that really stood out for you on that one in terms of, I guess, a big impact or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's great that the government have responded positively. I think looking at it, like their response essentially is broken up by support and action. So what can the government directly do in response? So if it's, certain funding things, is that their jurisdiction, and then did they fund that? Or is it support in terms of they give support to the FA or clubs or whoever it is? So some of it obviously will be implemented a lot sooner than others. But overall, like, it was a very positive response. I think we were all kind of expecting it to be, pretty standard, because if they come back said no, then it's quite telling of how they view women's football. But it's all come back very positive and very on board with the growth of the game. I think the stuff that I'm really interested in is the kind of talent pathway stuff and how they're looking at rebuilding that and kind of keeping that infrastructure in place so that women's football from grassroots up into the professional game stays really, really strong. And also kind of what they've said about improving diversity and ensuring that they are on top of that, which also ties into the 30 million grant from last week, where they said that all of that will be going towards different, or we're going towards 30 pitches, but they'll be maintaining that those will go into underprivileged areas. So I think for me, those points, and obviously the 3 p.m. blackout, how, where they have drawn the line with that. I know we're going to touch on that in a minute, so I won't go into that much. But I think a lot of it really shows where the government are trying to support the game. And obviously, we will see these changes and whatnot implemented over time, and hopefully we will see them regularly and soon. But, I think it could have come back and been like, yeah, we agree, but we're not going to do anything. But the action side of things, I think, is really positive. But, like everything, it takes time, and it will be good to see where we're at in a year and 2 years' time to see how much of this has been brought in, but it was needed. And yeah, I think for me, those are the main standout points that I think are really important.
She's not realised she's muted, is she?
I was just so intent listening then that I just completely forgot about myself. I think one of the biggest things for me is similar to you, Emily, talking about kind of the emerging talent camps and things like that. I think that's going to make a huge difference. One of my concerns, and what I think is a lot of people's concerns, is kind of how the gaps across the leagues could kind of be changing. We're seeing changes with Nuco coming in and sort of taking over the top 2 tiers. And there's been a lot of concern about how that's going to kind of, or could affect the lower leagues. So I think, the investment that the government are putting in across the board could be sort of hugely positive. Is there anything else that they're sort of going to do in terms of the emergent talent camps, or any kind of more facilities that they're going to throw out our way? Just anything that is going to kind of help build the game, but ensure that disparity between top and bottom isn't going to be kind of too broad.
Yeah, so in the response, they said about they're making the top 2 tiers of women's football fully professional. So making sure the championship is on par with WSL, and obviously that kind of ties in with NUCO. And it's again like the government have a certain amount of jurisdiction, but they can't essentially force the FA or anything into being like, you've got to do this, you've got to fund this. So they're kind of like an external extra force in a way. So they can't really do a lot. So what they've said in terms of like where their support lies is they want to keep working with NUCO and with the National League as to develop those. But obviously their main focus is trying to get the FA to make sure that the championship is professional as well as WSL. And then in there as well, they mentioned on working with the National League, and obviously that moved from a volunteer run set up to a funded positions. Obviously there's been change ups recently with the National League, but in there they were like, we're going to continue to work with them. And obviously I think it's something that can't really be addressed now with NUCO being in such a, no one really knows what's happening with it. And obviously whilst it's still kind of in process, that's not going to happen for a little while. So I think once NUCO is kind of up and running and we know where everything lies with that, we know how the championships are operating, we know how championship clubs are operating, and we know how all those cogs are going to fit together, then I think we bring in the conversation of, okay, so how do we factor in the National League? How do we make sure that they're benefiting? How do we get a trickle-down effect of funding? So their support of that is great, but the government can't do anything. But them making sure that the FA are on top of it is important. I think that's as much as they can physically do, unless there's some way they can magically give the National League a load of money, which is just not going to happen, unfortunately. And then, with emerging talent centres, there wasn't much in terms of like what they can physically do, but obviously then they've referred to a lot of the programs in place to try and get more young people playing football. And obviously they're referring to the Lionesses, equal access to PE stuff, and the new 30 million in the 3G pitches. They've kind of referred to all of that in terms of those are the building blocks and we're going to build on that. But they are, one thing I did stick out to me was they are putting new provisions in place for player welfare, for parental packages, for mental health provisions. That's all very stated very, very clearly that the government want the PFA, the FA, clubs, whoever's involved to really be ensuring a gold standard of care when it comes to footballers, which I think we will start to see, obviously with everything going on in all recent news. That is going to become a big talking point if we are getting more and more conversations of players being mistreated or clubs not taking women's problems seriously, or maternal packages not being offered. I think that is going to become a big talking point if it's not implemented properly. And I think it's probably one of the main ones that is kind of there, but obviously clubs, there's no overarching standard that they have to be meeting in terms of they've got to have this in place, they've got to have that in place. It's kind of, they have some, but it's not universal consistently across every club, across Championship and WSL. With that being stated, I think we're going to start to see more of those provisions coming into place, which obviously will then benefit going forward.
And I think that's it. I think everything on this list is pretty positive. But it's like you said there, the government can't action this. And I think that was I saw a bit of that. Like when they saw this come out, it was like, oh, that's going to be implemented. That's going to be implemented. But as you just said there, this is just the government supporting what that was in the review. It's now on the FA and other bodies to kind of action this and put this actually into place in terms of building, obviously, the infrastructure and the support networks and things like that, and putting the money in to make sure these things can happen. Obviously, you mentioned the blackout there. This is something that could affect, will affect, obviously United. So I know we've got a lot of United fans watching this as well that watch from abroad and for all other things around the UK as well. For people who maybe don't know, I guess, do you want to explain briefly what the 3 p.m. blackout currently is, why it's in place, and also, again, what this could mean for the women's game, because this is solely women's football. It's not the men's game this is going to affect. I wish they would, but it's not affecting that just yet.
Yeah, so essentially years and years ago, there was a ban put in place to stop Premier League games being broadcast in the UK between, I think it's like 2:45 and 5, if they kick off between 2:45 and 5:45, something like that. 3 p.m. won't be broadcast on a Saturday in the UK. They're broadcasted abroad, just not in the UK. Like if you're in any other European country, you could watch a Premier League game that kicks off at 3 p.m. on a Saturday. You just can't do it here. So like TNT, Sky, etc. can't broadcast those games. And it was basically put in place for a scenario that never actually really happened. And I can't quite remember the logistics all around it, but it was to safeguard certain things that never really came up. So it was kind of one of those preventative measures that was never really needed. But obviously it was brought in way before women's football was where it is now, way before it's professional. I'm pretty sure it was brought in like around the time it was banned, or in and around that time frame. I'm terrible with dates and whatnot, so don't quote me on that if it's wrong. But it was before, obviously, where we are now with women's football. And essentially what Karen Carney said in her original review was that there needs to be a designated women's football broadcast slot on a weekend that is a lot more feasible than a 6:45 p.m. Sunday kickoff, because realistically it's not positive for match going fans, it's not positive for young children, it's probably one of the worst time slots you could be given. And there was a massive outcry when it was suggested that men's football could get that slot, and it's like, well, this is what we've been saying for years when we've been given this 6:45 kickoff since, what was it, like the most recent broadcast deal, so what, 2.5, 3 years now. So yeah, essentially that's what's happened, and the government have basically said in their response that everything needs to be all involved. So EFL, Premier League, the FA, NewCo, etc., need to work together to create a broadcast slot that fits women's football beneficially. And one of the things that came up was obviously Article 48, which is what this ban is. And they basically suggested that they would be happy for that to be lifted for women's football, and they would be in support of the organisations deciding to do that. And if there was a massive backlash, and that obviously it's going to have to take a lot of negotiating with broadcasters and with the EFL and with the Premier League, and if there was a massive backlash against it, that they would not consider it, then should women's football then be compensated for a lack of commercial revenue that would come if they were given that slot? If that's denied, should they be compensated for it, essentially? Which I think in itself, that being stated, is really important, because it's a change of mindset now of looking at the women's game as a commercial entity. As we've always looked at it before as a fun, women's football, yay. Now we're looking at it, okay, how do we make this a lucrative economic structure? How do we make sure that we are funding it? How do we make sure that everything is going to pull together? And now with that kind of being stated, it's actually something that's becoming feasible, that we are seeing women's football now. It could become what's the word I'm looking for? Profitable. But obviously, if it's going to happen, I don't know. I can see it having a lot of backlash to the point that it's just easier not to think about it. But the idea of having a designated women's football slot on a weekend is prime, because it would obviously change something in terms of the men's either not having a certain slot or them finding a brand new slot within the weekend that would fit better. But it's got to really be kind of a 12 to 4 o'clock on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon, so it could benefit at-home fans, match-going fans, broadcasts, etc. I don't know how easy it's going to be, but yeah.
Because I'm pretty sure the blackout was brought in to get people into the ground. They were worried that if every game was broadcast, that people wouldn't be going to the ground, and it would affect teams lower down the pyramid in the men's game. But what this is doing in the women's game for me is it's actually doing the opposite and killing attendances because of these new kickoff times. United, obviously, this weekend are away to Spurs at 6:45. We had a 6:45 at Brighton. We've had all these late kickoffs furthest away from Manchester we could possibly get. So the fans that are travelling, it almost slashes in half the away travel. United travel well, and so do Arsenal, and obviously Chelsea pretty travel well as well. But it kills the attendances from that point of view because of the 6:45 slot as well. And even the 12:30s, we've had some 12 and 12:15 slots that are the other end of the country. And it's like, so then you're obviously killing it from that point of view. So 2-3, I love a 2-3 o'clock kickoff. You don't get many of them in women's football nowadays, for that reason. So I think it's doing the opposite effect. So the reason it was brought in for the men's, I think it's actually having a detrimental thing. So I really hope that this is followed through, because I think it could do massive things for women's football as a broadcast, because it needs to be broadcast and more eyes need to see it. You're not going to get everyone into the ground, but also without impacting attendances, because I feel like it's swung the other way now, where too much emphasis is put on the broadcasting and the match-going fans are getting left behind. Whereas for me, it needs to be just brought back to the centre a little bit and find that balance.
Yeah, I think I sort of fully agree with that. I think we kind of saw similar things last year with games being chopped and changed loads to try and fit in with TV schedules, which made it really difficult. I think I missed at least one game, maybe two, because the scheduling changed and I just couldn't go anymore. I mean, I've not been able to go to, I think it was Brighton away a few weeks ago. That was 6:45 kickoff, other end of the country on a Sunday, no chance. And same again, Spurs, I'm not going to be able to go to that. But I think with this kind of, a 3:00 kickoff, like Conner said, then it is sort of perfect time. I think there's also been a lot of emphasis recently on a lot of men's fans are wanting to get that kind of ban called off as well for the men's football. So, potentially it does have the opportunity to bring in fans that maybe wouldn't normally watch, because there's going to be a whole chunk of guys all sat around on a Sunday afternoon looking for some football to watch. And lo and behold, look, if we can get some women's football on TV, maybe they'll actually enjoy it and kind of like it. And again, like Conner says, it really does, I think, have the opposite effect on women's football and will encourage more people to sort of go to the ground. So I think if we can kind of get our own slot that is not some absolutely insane time, I can't really see any kind of negatives. For me, it's all mostly positive. And like we've mentioned, the game now is being seen as its own kind of commercial entity, which really does just to show kind of the growth that we've seen.
And I think that's it. There's no hidden. It's not a hidden secret that the money in men's football in particular is the broadcast deals and the TV rights that pay obviously huge sums of money to obviously generate that revenue. But I think it's got to be looked at as two separate things. I think I agree with a lot of what the comments are saying as well. James obviously I think is a match going fan as well. These kickoff times, it does make it harder. As I mentioned, the one that's coming up for United, 6:45 away at Spurs. For me, I think even from me, I'm in the Midlands, and it's about 2.5, 3 hours. So from the guys in Manchester, it's another 4.5. You're not getting back to the early hours. And if you've got kids and families, which women's football at the moment, that's what predominantly it is in terms of the crowd. I think, as JJ alluded to, it's exactly what Ian Wright said after the Euros. When the crowd is majority, I guess, kids and families, you can't do that on a Friday, on a Sunday night or a midweek, for example, or whatever it is. And especially when kickoff times keep getting changed. We had it last year. I think it was United Chelsea. I think they got moved about 3 times, and that was United Arsenal. It was when it got moved to the midweek, and we went from a sellout crowd to just scraping, I think, 3,000 or 4,000.
There's a massive problem as well with the lack of ahead planning. I know behind the scenes, obviously, there's a lot more that goes on, but fans and even us as press don't really get told about broadcast picks until kind of 3 weeks before. So you kind of get them at the end of the month for the next month coming up, which obviously then if you're changing dates, people that are traveling, people have to fly in, people that are coming from other countries that want to watch a WSL game that are contributing to, the commercial revenue, to the attendances, to everything that's positive, it's making it harder. So we're really working against ourselves when it comes to doing growing the game as a whole when things are conflicting with each other. And I think it's one of those things that we've got to think about how we want to prioritize the growth and then how do we effectively support that. And at the moment, we're not really capitalizing on that. But I think realistically, a lot of it, all these conversations will come up when the broadcasting rights go to market soon. Obviously, with the Premier League ones being in market at the moment, the WSL will go up after this. So when I spoke to Dawn Airy and Sue Campbell at the FA at the start of the season, they both said that we'll go to market with this after the Premier League rights, so that they don't all get muddied together, because they're trying to keep it separate, as they should be. But it is really difficult when they're getting an £8 billion deal on the men's side. Obviously, that's going to be agreed before the WSL rights come up, which means their slots, their decision-making is all going to be done, and then women's football get the secondary thought, which, of course, I'm not expecting them to get first thought. Like, come on, 8 billion, we're not going to be getting that. I would love it, but we ain't going to be getting that. 8 million was last year. Hopefully we can, or not last year, the last broadcast rights was 8 million. Hopefully we can be hitting higher. It deserves it. But obviously then we have to filter around what is in that new broadcast over the Premier League. And it's then considerations of how do we then fit into that? Because obviously it's really difficult when there's only so many hours in a day to broadcast football and there's so many clashes. It's like the men's Arsenal game and women's game being put on at the same time. You had massive problems with fans. Was it Arsenal Chelsea last season was the same time as the men's North London derby. Like, if you're trying to support the growth of the game, doing that is stupid. But it's how these things work. So I don't know.
I think that's United Liverpool actually on the 17th. Both men and women play at the same day. I think that luckily that it doesn't clash too much because the women kick off at 12:15 and the men are at 4:30. So there is a gap. But even then, for people like me I'll be travelling back, so I'll miss the men's game on the way, which I get. But I could probably stop. I'll probably stop at the services and watch it. I've got to be honest. There's no way I'm missing both of them. But I think that's it. And I think you're trying to factor in not clashing with the men's sides, stadium use obviously as well. A couple of the teams ground share with other men's sides, so you got that to worry about as well. So there's a lot of factors there. There's a couple of questions in the comments I just wanted to quickly get to. Erling saying, well, obviously the strange kickoff times. I'm assuming you mean the 6:45s and potentially some of the earlier ones. Will they still be there if games are allowed to be broadcast around that kind of 3 o'clock time?
Most likely things won't completely change for a while. There will always be some sort of late kickoff, whether it's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We're not going to be able to completely scrap that altogether. And I think that's something that, it's going to be really difficult to find other broadcast slots, because especially if, with there only being 6 games a weekend in WSL, it is feasible in a sense to broadcast all 6. They're not going to commercially or not. It's not proactive. However, broadcasting as many as possible, I believe, is kind of the way forward right now, as long as they're not causing a massive detriment and we're losing money in doing so, which obviously stunts growth, yada, yada, yada. But I think let's say in scenario that happens, because whatever gets negotiated with this 3 p.m. blackout will be a long time from now. It's nothing that's going to come into effect next season or season after. We're talking like kind of 2, 3, 4 years down the line, I think. But we're always going to have to negotiate with stuff. So they're not going to be eradicated completely, but we may be able to negotiate to see less of them. But a lot of that will come down to the broadcasting deal that's going to be negotiated for next season under new co. And whoever takes those rights. And I know there was another comment I think we'll come to it about paywalls and stuff. But obviously all of that comes into effect. I have mixed opinions on whether paywalls and women's football should be in the same place. I think at some point we have to start profiting and we have to start making this commercially lucrative. And the only way to do that is by making more money. How do you do that? By getting fans to pay for things. So I think most likely if TNT, I know they have said that they want to bid for it. If they do, obviously behind a paywall, how much of that then goes back into the league and back into the revenue of the game will be determined in this rights deal. But under NewCo now, it's more beneficial having a broadcasting deal that is more lucrative, and if that is behind a paywall, because clubs then get the revenue from the broadcasting deal. So under the FA at the moment, the FA get the money from all the commercial deals and broadcast and whatnot. Now under new code, that goes back into the clubs and back into the league. So it's a better structure in terms of if we put it behind a paywall, at least the money is going back in towards the game. But it's not necessarily effective. But I don't really know how they're going to do it. And I don't think anyone really knows what the best thing is, because we are still in a learning curve. So it is possible. Goodbye FA player. When it works and when the cameraman is not having to wipe his lens 24/7, it works brilliantly. It's the best thing in the world. But, pardon me, it's one of those things that it's going to be baby steps. We might get rid of a 6:45, but we might have to do 6 p.m. for next season. Or we might end up doing, we get less 6:45 kickoffs, but that means, more Saturdays. So if you're a men's fan and you want to be going to that games, you may have to forfeit. It's always going to be a give and a take. And until 5-10 years time, that's how it's just going to have to be. But we'll see what happens. I'm excited. I don't know what's going to happen, but I do think putting some of it behind a paywall is not the worst thing in the world. Don't come for me with that. But generating some revenue that goes back into the game is that we've got to push it forward, because unless a company is going to rock up and go, I'm going to give you £100 billion, do what you want with it in women's football, it's not going to happen. But if something like that could happen, then we wouldn't need to put it behind paywalls, but we've got to be generating revenue somehow. And if it's got to come this way, it's got to happen.
The paywall thing, I remember when it obviously was spoken about for the Champions League, that they were going to put that obviously behind a paywall, and the backlash that was on that talking about it. But I think it's as much as I think when you look at teams that are up in their ticket price, obviously United have done that this season. Chelsea have upped it by quite a lot when you're looking at their ticket price this season. Obviously, I know there's a lot of conversation about their attendances, but I think it's heading in that direction. And like you said, if you want the whole of women's football to grow, people need to pay more for it. It's the only way. And like you said, unless a big company comes in and goes, right, we're going to accept a loss for the next decade and just give you all this money, it's not going to happen. Fans have got to pay for it as well, but then it's finding that balance between not raising it too much that it puts some fans. It's really finding that balance.
Really got much of a choice, and it's kind of the same with ticket prices raising. Like, it's been great fun, going and watching women's football. Like a few years ago, I could like getting a game for free. I remember going to watch, I think, Liverpool and Man City maybe, or like Liverpool and Chelsea, and I got in for free. I think I snuck in as like an under 16, despite the fact I was probably about 20. Sorry, see, I'm part of the problem. Basically, I stole a ticket, but I mean, tickets I think were like £4, and I do think that you are going to have to raise the price a little bit. I think women's football, again, kind of going back to the whole family day out sort of thing, it's a really cheap option for that, which is fantastic. And I understand that might make it slightly less accessible. But I also think that another sort of positive of that is, will it be taken a little bit more seriously? One pro is that it might be more of okay, this isn't actually like a fun little kiddie day out. This is actually for people that are screaming at their team and at the opposition and getting into it, like I happen to do sometimes. And I don't think that you've really got much of a choice. Unfortunately, it's just kind of the way the world works. I mean, ideally, I'd like it to stay at a sort of sustainable level and not get as insane as men's football at any point. But I mean, we're a long, long way off that even being part of the kind of question. But yeah, like we've said, you've just not got any choice. You've got to get money, basically. Unfortunately, the world does not run off hopes and dreams. I wish it did, but it does not. Everything just comes back to money, and we want to see it.
On that, I think we have a really good opportunity now for women's football not to go down the route men's football did, and we have essentially a brand new product that we have been building and will continue to build on, that we are generating a brand new model for, and it is the best time now to trial new things, to go, hey, let's put so many games behind a paywall and see what happens, because there's always a way around it. People will find ways to stream things, like there's always loopholes. However, it's looking at, can we find a middle ground? Can we generate some income from this? Can we find some profit and still make it accessible, still have it, easy as pie? I would say it's more likely to be WSL games that put behind a paywall sooner than championship, because I think that still needs to be accessible. That still needs to be prioritized. I think if there's days or weekends that we don't have WSL, pedal championship, like get people in there, try and promote as much as possible, try and bridge that gap, and let's say if you put randomly one time all of the accessible broadcasted games, the WSL goes behind a paywall, pedal the championship. Like that's how, like, we've got to start figuring ways to make this a model that works for everyone, and it's better than going down the same route men's did, even though in some ways we are, but we have an opportunity to do it right, and it's by not doing what's been done before and not being afraid to try things that are new. But obviously, we have to see what happens. We don't know what's going to happen. So
interesting few years ahead, that's for sure. We've not even got onto the Champions League yet, which we'll do very shortly, because that obviously could impact United. Fingers crossed it impacts United, because that means we're in it. So we're going to get to that in a second. Yeah, I agree with Paula's point as well. It's massively undervalued, but very easy to market. I think it is, and I think it pains me to say it, but I think Arsenal are very good at this. Arsenal, for me, are the best club in the WSL at marketing and getting the club out there in terms of making it more accessible to get to women's games. We've seen obviously the sellouts at the Emirates and how they're able to get a lot of fans there, and just their general marketing, I think, is better than other clubs are doing right now, which is a good thing for the game, because obviously it means that more fans are coming in, and maybe some of them will go there as a neutral, watch United and go, oh, hang on, quite like that other team in red, and come over to United. But yeah, and I agree with the second part of that as well. Raise the price a bit and just up it a little bit. If there's a massive jump all of a sudden, if United go for, I think our tickets are £12 a game at the moment. If they suddenly go up to 30, it's a bit like, oh, hang on a minute, what's going on here? Going from 12 to 16 or to 15 or something, I don't think it's a massive jump. And it's the way it's going. I think even this is kind of a little bit off topic, but Jess obviously recently with the City away allocation for the Conner Cup, it's now in stages. It's season ticket holders only, then it's members, and it went straight away for United. Season ticket, it didn't even get down to the next block to members and general sale, because season tickets took it, and that's the way that it will go. and obviously the money.
Yeah, I don't actually know much about that because I just left you to deal with my ticket, Connor. And I actually did literally nothing. You just messaged me and said, I'm going to get you a ticket. And then a bit later on, you were like, okay, I've done it. It all sold out. And my well, thank God, because I would not have managed to do anything myself. And I would be sat on the roof or something, trying to like climb in. So thank you once again for hooking me up with a ticket because I'm just incapable.
I was going to say, yeah, if people did get one, very lucky. It wasn't a big allocation. I think it was 360 something or 390, I think it was. But yeah, it's all gone. It went literally on day one. So unfortunately, you'll have to sit with the City fans if you want to go as a United fan, which, to be fair, if you've been following women's football for a few years, you'll be used to that because we've had to do that for a few years.
That's still allowed because I had I work like 99% of games I go to, I have to work. So I only ever see it. But like, I swear there was a thing that with the allocations in place, like I know with the men's game, like if you're an away fan, you can't, like then you're not allowed to essentially sit in with the normal fans if you're like wearing your shirts and whatnot. I know that's restricted, but like, is that similar?
We definitely had City fans at Old Trafford were in our block. I know that. We're in the standing section above the tunnel where we were, which they shouldn't have been, to be honest, because that's where the United singing section was, but there was definitely City fans in there.
Because that's, I think, the next thing that's going to get policed is like how, because I remember it last season, I went to the Women's North London Derby as a fan with friends that were asked, they had like a spare ticket, it wasn't working. I was like, yeah, I'll go. And ended up being sat like in an Arsenal section with a load of Spurs fans. And they were like very like Arsenal, yahoo, and they were not happy for having Spurs fans next to them. And it was quite interesting because I was like, I don't usually get all of this. Like I'm just sat, with my head on a laptop. But it's quite interesting that I feel like that's the next thing that's going to get cracked down on is that if we've got away allocations, and obviously that's been brought in by the FA to have that in terms of their licensing, for clubs licensing, to have away allocations done. And I think it's the best thing. Like I think it's brilliant. But I think then we'll start seeing a crackdown on away fans or, external fans being sat like together, because that does technically like rival the need to have an away allocation. But then again, if there's not enough tickets, then, there's all of those lovely caveats to growth, essentially.
Yeah, I'm so glad it's becoming the norm. Obviously, from a United point of view, we're very lucky. We get an away section or allocation for pretty much every game now, which literally wasn't the case. You go back 18 months, and we had to basically make our own. It was the supporters club tweeting out, book around there, we'll make our own section, which now we're actually getting our own.
The FA enforcing it as part of clubs is like within their licensing is the best thing, because now clubs in the WSL, it's not necessarily enforced in Conti Cup, etc. They can do it, but it's not enforced. But in the WSL, they're making sure that clubs are working for away allocations is now it is like a benchmark standard now. So it should be being done by every club going forward for eternity, essentially, as long as the FA don't revoke that. But I don't think they would. It's been so successful, and it generally makes the game so much better having away fans that can then have you have rival chants going at it. I remember I think it was Arsenal Man United at the Emirates last season, and like it was before. I think it was kind of at that turning point where fans became really vocal on both sides. Like it was at that time where like fans were kind of, it was still like 3-4 months after the Euro, so like people were getting there, but it wasn't this kind of like community established going to main stadia compared to like what it's like, this season playing at main stadia. It's so loud, but I remember that game and it was like you could kind of hear bits, but now it's like you go to those sorts of stadiums and it's like, oh, okay, people are loud, and that's brilliant. But I think that comes from having away allocations and having that sort of fan systems in place. Like it's brilliant.
I think it just creates like an atmosphere, basically. You like you say, you've got rival fans basically kind of seeing each other, and it does just create a better atmosphere. This year is basically the first year that I've actually managed to get myself into the correct area. I've always found myself just sat in completely the wrong place, basically. But like we've just sort of said, it didn't matter because I'd look around, there'd be more United fans around me anyway. So, I mean, at the Etihad last year, I didn't realise that we had a little away section. So I was just sat behind one of the goals with City fans, but there were probably equal number of United fans around me. And for the games that I've been going to like all my life, it's just been completely random. But now I find it's more noticeable when rival fans are in your kind of group, in your little area. And it is becoming less and less, which I think is only going to be good for the game, because again, I think this sort of creating an atmosphere, creating a sort of good mentality from the fans, like fans are getting into it a little bit more. I think it's only going to help to grow the game, but not only grow the game, get people interested in football, you know, get people kind of interested in the team. It's one thing kind of just going to watch a random football game, but I think these kind of home and away ends get people more into like the whole fan kind of vibe, and just get behind their team a little bit more, and then, you know, more likely to follow their team, go to future games, follow the team around the country, get a better away allocation, that kind of thing. So I think it's only going to be a positive thing for the league, and just hope we get to see a lot more of it.
No, 100%. We're certainly looking forward to our little away section. I say little, pretty much. Well, we have, I think. No, I think there's a few tickets still left, but yeah, pretty much sold out the away bit behind the goal for at Spurs' ground there as well. So that's going to be quite good. We'll move on to the Champions League for a little bit. Very quickly, and just to answer your question, I'm not going to lie, I just don't think they want that many United fans. Is the honest answer. I think they could have offered more. They have offered more in the past. Potentially it being Conti Cup, they're maybe not thinking there's going to be as many. Maybe the reason, but they've certainly offered a lot more than that. In the past, pretty much double, treble sometimes. So I'm a little bit surprised it's so low, but yeah, maybe they'll give us a little bit more close to the time if their ticket sales are not going too well, but I wouldn't hold out much hope, for being honest. Just book near the away block, you'll be fine. On to the Champions League then. Now, this is a weird one for me because I don't agree with a lot of these changes. I feel like they've made a lot of changes for change's sake, just because they can, rather than because it's the best thing for it. Emily, what's your thoughts on the change? Obviously, the big one, obviously, the change of the format, changing up into more of a league format with obviously the group stages as well. There's obviously a load of other things in there. Let's talk of a new competition from 25-26, which essentially is I'm going to just say what it is. I think it's basically like what the Europa League is. So another team from each league will go into Europe, which is good. You know, obviously with fourth place potentially getting into that as well from the WSL point of view. Lots of conversation around our coefficient at the moment and what that means for our Champions League group. But yeah, what's your kind of thoughts on the revamp, I guess, of the Champions League and this potential new competition that can come in as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming it will end up with a name like Europa League or Champions League. I'm assuming it will be very similar. I was actually doing a show with 90 Min earlier, and Rach from Girls on the Ball called it the Europa League, as in like her, which I thought was quite funny.
I like that. I really like that.
Yeah, credit to her for that one. I think it's interesting because actually looking at the split of it, the way they're designing it, and I think it's really smart, and I think it's the best way to go in terms of doing a second competition, is it's not guaranteeing third, fourth, fifth place WSL teams a new competition. It's prioritizing countries with low coefficient. So what would have been countries that could have got like a league path place in the Champions League that really never ever got through the qualifying phases, they're now prioritized. So it's like things like leagues like 13 to something or other, but they're all given a spot in the Europa League, and then lower down are essentially like prioritized. And then if depending on coefficient, England should have possibly one guaranteed spot. I don't know what it will be like at the end of the season. And then usually, like similarly how it will be, there'll be a second and a third place in WSL will go into the qualifying phases. If teams then got knocked out in the qualifying phases, so for this scenario, Arsenal, Man United from this season, they would then have a chance to go into the Europa League. So it's not actually dedicating more spots to top leagues, essentially. It's giving priority to lower coefficient countries, which I think is the best way to kind of develop the gap across the spectrum, because it's all good and well having, you know, Germany, England, France, and Spain with like brilliant leagues, but if then we're leaving every other league behind, you know, these sorts of Europa and Champions League competitions become a bottleneck. So I actually think it's the smartest way to develop a broader spectrum Champions League, European, continental landscape by prioritizing smaller nations. And I actually think it is probably the best way to go. Obviously, I would love to, you know, see a fourth and fifth place WSL team going forward, but at the moment, the second chance WSL essentially would be for the second and third place teams if they didn't make it through qualifying to the Champions League, go into the Europa League, or they have some sort of playoff for a place in the Europa League. That being that is its own thing. I think it's a smart move. I don't know how effective it's going to be. I don't know what it's going to look like or funding wise or anything like that. They've given very little information, and I'm a big advocate that when UEFA or FIFA do things like this, that there should be a panel or an opportunity for scrutiny from not only the press but fans, because it's an opportunity for us to get clarity, because there is so much we don't know, to the point that when a few of the journos were looking at it, it is up to about 64 teams that could be in the Europa League. It's that vague that we actually don't know whether it's going to be a 64 team sort of qualifying into league situation, or if like how they're going to do that. We don't know if it's all the teams that get knocked out of the Champions League qualifying phase going to Europa, or is it a playoff? Because they said it's a second chance. You know, does that mean a second chance for every team, or is it a second chance as in a playoff for a place in your like? It is so what's the word? Under like stood, I guess. It's just not well explained. And then with the Champions League, why is my first reaction? Because
Literally my reaction. Why?
It's like UEFA looked at the fact that people wanted change and went, we're going to change everything you actually like about the Champions League. Like, we've had the group stages for what, 2-3 seasons? Nope, not anymore. You're not getting that anymore. You're getting a league, which removes so much of the jeopardy. It removes so much of like the essence of unknowingness when you're playing in a league situation. Playing in a group stage, it's so much more involved for fans. It's so much more cohesive. Like now, I don't love the idea of playing 6 teams, 3 away, 3 at home. Like, I don't love the idea of it. I don't think it's the worst option, but I preferred it when it was 3 teams home and away. Because now it's just kind of a bit of a mishmash, and you lose that kind of, okay, we played them once, now we know, how to go against it, and you usually get a bit.
I have a quick question. So is it 6 different teams? So you'd play 3 random teams at home, then 3 other random teams away?
Yeah.
No, I hate that even more.
Yeah.
Why would you do that? No. Because one of the best things about Champions League is, I'll just use United Men as an example. I don't know why, because they're rubbish half the time. They play a European team, and you're like, okay, they've just done terribly against that team, but it's fine because we've got the reverse fixture. Maybe they will go away and actually do something, and 9 times out of 10 they do not. But you've got that option, and it gives you like, you've got a bit more hype behind it. You've seen them play, you feel like you want to get some revenge. That's unnecessary. That's just doing something for the sake of saying, oh, look, we've looked at this league for you girlies and we've done something. You're welcome. No one asked for it.
Yeah. Essentially, it's the Swiss model that they're bringing into the men's competition at the start of the 24-25 season. So they haven't even trialled it with the men's yet. And they're saying, right, women's, you're getting it 25-26. Like, it's really underthought in terms of how this is going to work. And the one thing we did ask for, which was an expansion, we're now expanded to 2 more teams. I thought it was going to be kind of like, obviously 16. I thought we were going to go to 20. I think we probably should have gone to 20. I think, 2 more teams really, like, it doesn't make it that much difference. But, it's the sort of thing that if we went to 20 teams, it's so much more exciting. But I don't know kind of decision making behind it with UEFA. But I do think like some sort of scrutiny was needed because there's so kind of little understanding, and they did it with the men's. They kind of dropped it in this new format ahead of the men's Euros draw, and now they've dropped it in for the women. Like, you're going to get it, but we're going to tell you everything later. We told you you're getting it, but we're not going to explain it. So I'm not the biggest fan of it. I think it will probably backfire. I think it's going to ruin a lot of it. I think it's going to take the fun out of it. It takes the jeopardy out of it, and for all we know, it's going to crash and burn in the men's game next season. But we're stuck with it. They're not going to backtrack on it now. But
I think that's just on that 6 different teams thing. I speak to one of my good friends, a Bayern fan, and when I was speaking to her, she obviously, when their group was drawn, obviously PSG, Roma, and Ajax, you get that thing of, oh, there's 3 different places I can go, and I know that's still going to be the same, but at least you know where you're going, and you can travel, things like that, and it, like I said, you're playing them twice, you have the opportunity of going there. If let's say United get into this in 25-26. We get drawn, let's just say Bayern, for example. I'm like, oh, great, get to go to Munich. And then you get the home draw. It's, so we don't get to go to Munich. We get to go somewhere else that maybe you don't want to go as much. So I know that this is a very small market in women's football in terms of European travelling away fans. It's not absolutely huge. But there are some that that will want that. And just very quickly on the Europa League type thing that is looking to be introduced as well. I was speaking to somebody about this who well connected at a couple of the clubs that are currently in the Champions League and in that get into the qualifying rounds. And I have got permission to say this. I did ask before we went live, but there's a lot of clubs that are absolutely hating this because UEFA are putting more demands on clubs without necessarily providing the funding to some of these clubs that don't have the budget size of some of the top clubs. So it's great having these ideas and having these extra games for some of these clubs, but the funding's got to be there as well because it's travel, it's translators, obviously for interviews and these kinds of things. There's a lot that comes with having these games. It's not just turning up and going. For some of these smaller clubs that are going to be in this competition, the money's not always there as well.
The assumption is this will increase investment and revenue, which is a theoretical situation. There is no way to determine whether a new competition or European football, yada yada, benefits smaller clubs, especially in the women's game. It's so new, it's so juvenile that there is no kind of solid thing to back that up at the moment. In theory, like, you know, you could present a case to say, oh, by the way, you know, so-and-so club have benefited this much from that. But that's not, you know, that's not applicable to every club across every league, across every, you know, every Champions League experience. And I think we're moving off an assumption that this is going to be really beneficial commercially. And I don't think we, like, UEFA have fully thought it through whether that's going to come into effect. But it's like you look at Levante. They've literally, like, they now have an opportunity, depending on how the draws work, that they could win a Europa League because they are kind of out of that top group in terms of, you know, champions of Europe, yada yada, top teams. They're kind of in that midsection, kind of, you know, had a bit of experience in Champions League qualifying, had never really broken through. You know, they could do really well in Europa League, but they've just had a funding cut. So how is that going to be sustainable for them? So it's things like that, like how are we really navigating this and how much consultation was done with clubs? I'm interested to know whether any was done. You know, how much has been done with external contributors in terms of experts and can't think of the word now. People got brought in to talk about things. Auditors, that sort of stuff. Like
advisors is the only other word I could think of.
All that sort of stuff. How much consultation was done with this? Or have they literally gone, we're going to do it for the men's, you're doing it for the women's?
Probably that.
I don't, you know, I can't say I don't know.
Sporty did ask a question kind of along those lines. Do you think the new format is an attempt to break away in the men's game? I don't think it is. I think it's. I agree with the two guys have just said here. I think it's very much the men are having it, so have this. And I think, Jess, you just summed it up perfectly. It's almost like, oh, we are doing things for women's football. Well, look, we are changing things and doing things rather than actually thinking about the knock-on effects and how it affects actual clubs. It's just, oh, look at us, we've done something.
We've done something. You cannot complain now about anything else for a while.
Yeah,
and that's the thing. One of the comments actually about that home advantage. You could draw, essentially. You could draw 3 of the top teams. I mean, it's 2 teams from each pot. So essentially, you could draw Barcelona and Lyon, and then pot 2 you could essentially draw Arsenal and, I don't know, I'm trying to think of another club, Rosengard, and then you could draw Paris and Ajax, but you could end up drawing the 3 strongest teams away. And then your home advantage really doesn't do a lot when you're then, let's say you lose 3 points to the top teams, and then you gain, my maths is terrible, but let's say you lose all those games away that are like against the big teams, but then you win 2 of the games at home and draw 1. Doesn't balance. Whereas if you're playing the bigger teams at home, it's the luck of the draw. Whereas you knew with the group stage, you were playing them away and home, you had an advantage at home, or like you had an advantage of a traveling contingent of fans. Like it removes any sense of like, I guess, level playing field, if you want to call it that, because you were then essentially banking everything on an away game and then a home game that are going to be completely separate entities, completely separate teams, different games. Like, it doesn't seem like it's been fully thought out in terms of how will this impact the women's game. It's like,
I just don't get it. Like, there was no, I don't think anyone has ever complained about the current format. Like, I've never heard anyone say, oh, the going home and away is stupid, we should just play 6 different teams. I've never heard anyone come up with that suggestion. And quite honestly, I was trying to get my head around earlier how this new Champions League structure was going to work, and I couldn't even understand it. And now I feel like I'm finally getting to the bottom of it, and it just makes no sense to me. Like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You don't have to do things just for the hell of doing them. Like, no one asked for this, I don't think. I'm sure there is the odd person that didn't like the old structure, but I've just never seen anyone even comment on it.
Yeah.
Like, it just is fine. You don't need to mess with things just to say you've done something. Just leave it alone. It's fine.
It's really interesting you say that if it's not broke, don't fix it. I don't even think we've had long enough with this format to even consider if it's broken. Like, we've not had it to a point that we can go, actually, there are problems with this format. Like, everyone's happy with the group stage. I think the best change we ever did was it being a single leg final rather than it being a two-leg. I hate two-leg finals. And Europa League at the moment is a two-legged final. It's stupid. There's no jeopardy with a two-legged final because you could get thrashed 4-0 in the first leg and be like, well, fuck that shit. Like, we're not going to get any further. So, sorry, I'm not supposed to swear.
I love that. You're one of the first guests that's ever come on and swore. I love it.
And I was like, oh, God.
So,
No, you fire away. The thing is, you've opened it now, so we're allowed to.
So, no. I mean, to be fair, I went through an entire 50-minute show earlier and didn't swear, and then I swear today. So you can blame it on the fact that I've been in Scotland and I've been travelling and I had all the joys of the Nations League last night and whatnot. So
do you know what? It's stress. It's stress. This whole thing is just stress.
Yes.
Swatty with another question here. What's it meant, obviously, new for address the attempted formation of a Euro Super League? The less said about a Super League, the better. Obviously, that I'm still not fully convinced.
Someone will listen to it and speak it, like, will speak it into existence, basically.
Yeah, I'm not fully convinced that ever went away, I've got to be honest.
The worst thing for me that will ever happen is with this new league system in the Champions League, that it will come down to goal difference, goal scored, yada, head-to-head, and we'll get to a point where clubs are literally going to be level consistently so that we're going through, like, every possible caveat just to separate them. Because I just don't get how, like, unless, obviously, with Barca, they're going to score a lot of goals, but, like, in the event of, like, clubs being level on points, level on goals scored, level on goals conceded, level on goal difference, level on head-to-head, like, how many more considerations do we need to get through? Because permutations are the bane of my life, and how many more are going to have to deal with now with this new format? Like, it's not
a headache every time. I still have a headache thinking about the Nations League, to be honest.
I was going to say that was a nice little segue that you've just done there into, obviously, last night and the drama that unfolded, obviously, with England. Yeah, I know it was actually. Obviously, you're talking about goal difference and things, obviously, how that affected. Because there was a bit of confusion, not gonna lie. I thought it was head-to-head, which is why I thought England were completely out of it and everything else. But obviously, it wasn't.
Head-to-head was cancelled out after Wembley because they were level on head-to-head after that game because essentially the England lost to the Netherlands by the same margins that the Netherlands lost to England. So the three criteria for head-to-head was wiped out on Friday. So going into the game on last night, it was always based on goal difference. And then if that was level, it goes down to goals scored, which England were ahead, but obviously then lost out on goal difference.
So I was right.
Permutations.
Right, I'm going back into a group chat later on saying I told you it was head-to-head. I knew it was.
Yeah, it was head-to-head first. Head-to-head was always the first criteria for separating teams. And then it goes into goal difference, goal scored. But head-to-head was wiped out on Friday. So that's why it came down to goal difference.
Indeed. Right. Yes, I can't wait to boast about that later on, saying I was right. Because they were adamant that I wasn't. Jess, I'll actually come to you first. This obviously, we know that obviously England/GB obviously didn't go through despite a 6-0 thrashing of another nation within Team GB, obviously in Scotland last night. From a United point of view, obviously Ella Toon finally gets a summer off, along with obviously potentially Letitia, obviously Mary Earps. She might not be a Lioness by the time we get round. She might not be a United player by the time we get round to the next tournament. But that's a whole other conversation. Obviously, the United girls do get a rest. And to be fair, a lot of our players, I don't think we've got many going to the Olympics at this rate. You know, a lot of countries, representing nations are out anyway. But yeah, what do you think, Jess, on England not making it, obviously, and Team GB not making it to the Olympics?
I think ignoring like the summer off, because I think realistically that is actually a blessing. But sort of ignoring that, I think the way the kind of qualification for the Olympics works, I don't think, how many teams are there that actually go to the Olympics, like women's teams? It's something quite low. I'm sure it's like 12. 12.
There's 12 teams, and basically there's 2 European spots plus France. So
yeah, so I think in all honesty, if England or Team GB had qualified, then you'd be saying like, well, Netherlands deserve to be there. So I don't think there's not really an easy way of, or a good way of saying it, because I do think that Netherlands deserve to be there. But I do think that Team GB England equally deserve to be there. So to be honest, I've not even looked at the other teams that have qualified. So I guess it just kind of comes down to how those two teams played, like on the day. I think that they, again, ignoring the fact that it's probably positive that the girls have got a summer off, I think that they really should expand the amount of teams going. I think if we're wanting to grow the game across the globe, the Olympics is a good way to do it. I mean, I remember London 2012. Women's football was boosted massively during that time, massively. So I do feel like it's a bit of a missed opportunity for not just England. There's a number of teams. I don't think Sweden qualified. Was it Sweden? I don't think they qualified either.
They're in a relegation playoff now as well, because they finished third in that group.
There's some big teams. And like I said, I think Netherlands and GB England deserve to be there equally so. I wouldn't really rank one too much above the other. And the fact that, they both won a game against each other kind of just goes to kind of prove that it could have really gone either way. So I think that's sort of the biggest thing for me, that it needs expanding if possible. I don't know too much, to be honest, about the Olympic structure. The last time I really paid any attention was 2012, and that was a long time ago now. But I think, again, it's just an area where growth could happen.
And Emily, just before you jump in, I'm going to throw a question to you as well, because this has been thrown around on Twitter and relevant or different, people from different federations across the globe have been fighting this out over the last 24 hours, I've noticed on Twitter, which never happens, does it? But there's a sense of, obviously, what Jess said, obviously, about deserving to be there and so on and things like that. Now there's a lot of talk, obviously, about the way that the formatting was, obviously, with the Nations League being the qualification into it. Do you think these conversations would still need to be happening, obviously, with England not making? Do you think if England/GB would have got there wouldn't be as much pressure on this side of the globe to be changing the way that the format is? Because that seems to be the impression, I think, that the many Americans, I guess Canadian and so on, that I've spoke to over that side seem to think it looks from over here.
I mean, you got to look at, like, Canada are reigning champions, and they had to do a playoff to get qualification. Like, no one has essentially walked into the Olympics. Everyone has had to fight for it in some degree, have had to win some sort of competition or had to do something to get there. It's not like with the World Cup and the former qualification process that, you came second or third or something and you got qualification. Everyone's had to fight for it in some degree. I think we have a bubble in England where we are very focused on the Lionesses, and it's going to happen. English people love English football. Makes sense, doesn't it? But in the same breath, like, if you're a fan of football and you've been a fan of football for a long time, the idea of Sweden not being in the Olympics for the first time is massive. Them being in a relegation playoff is massive. Like, it is mental when you think about them, like, how many good teams are not going to be in the Olympics this summer. And I think I agree with the points that it is best for the players to have a summer off. It is brilliant. But like Serena said post-match last night, you didn't want to do it by missing out on a major tournament. That's like the hard part of that. You're missing out on a possibility of playing and winning an Olympics in order to, have a summer off. That's not how you wanted it to have happened, but that's obviously where we're at now. I think in terms of the Nations League, I've never really been a fan of it. I don't really get the point of it. I think it's a really convoluted way of trying to separate teams that now, like, we were having this conversation on the train back, myself and Tom Gary from The Telegraph, because now UEFA ranking system is thrown out the window, because originally teams were ranked in League A and League B based on where they stood on, like, the ranking system. But now you've got, like, obviously Ireland being promoted, Scotland are relegated, Wales are relegated. Are those rankings that automatically changed? Are now Ireland ranked 14th, but actually they're ranked 17th or 18th, but now they're ranked, higher up just because they won. It's really convoluted. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So now I'm like, going into the Euros qualifiers, England are in pot 2, which means they're now guaranteed, obviously being in second place of the group, they're now in pot 2. So they are guaranteed to play either the Netherlands, Germany, Spain, or France. So even to get to and the only thing with the Euros qualifiers now is that it's the top 2 from League A, the top 2 in each group go forward. Like, it is the bane of my life. I don't want to do this, but it's one of those that's like, it's so convoluted just to be able to do and talk about anything that I understand why people are annoyed and are, see it as we're going to have a less, not enthusiastic, but a less refined tournament because you're missing out on X, Y, and Z countries. But I think that's the point of football in a way. Like, it's not going to be the most exciting tournament because England aren't in it or Sweden aren't in it, but it's still going to be football that is jeopardized, that you have winners and losers, and it's just how we take that. But obviously, in terms of, like, if you were to rank the major tournaments, it's obviously World Cup, Euros, Olympics for a lot of people. Like, the Olympics is more of an event than it is a major tournament in football. So I think it's a really hard one, but I think actually I was never under the impression that Scotland and England being drawn in the same group was that outrageous, because there was no way to stop it from happening. Like, unless you physically forced Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales into League B, ignoring all of the rankings, if you went, nope, simply you can't play each other, you have to be in League B, there was no way to stop Scotland and England facing each other, even if they were joining separate groups, because if they both topped their respective groups and met in the semi-final, how do you stop that from happening? Or let's say they were the two in the final, how do you stop that from happening? It's impossible. So I don't like everyone going, oh, Scotland should have thrown the game, it's football. Like, there's a rivalry there. Like, it's not going to be a massive thing, if I don't really know how to explain it, but all of everyone going, oh, Scotland should throw the game, like, what? Have you seen football? Like, they're not going to go, oh, I want a chance to play in the Olympics, so I'm going to let them score 25 past us. Like, that just doesn't happen. And people suggesting that that's what they should have done, in my opinion, are a bit stupid. Because, like, if the shoe was on the other foot, if Scotland were the nominated nation, are you going to tell England, marry ups, have a day off, let 25 in, and then maybe you go, like, it just doesn't happen. And I just think the whole thing, like, the whole conversation is just get to a point now where things are being used as and things are being thrown around as arguments that really aren't arguments. And I think part of that comes back to what you were saying in terms of, people are outraged that England aren't going to be in it. Yes, it's a big thing, but right now, if you look at, like, how they got there, England didn't deserve a place with the Nations League run. If you're going to drop points in the Netherlands, you're going to drop points to Belgium, and you're going to have bad games. If you're going to lose those games by those margins and by your own mistakes, do you deserve to be there? Probably not. I think the way it happened obviously is awful, because scoring 6 and it not being enough in the end, it is heartbreaking. It's awful. But, like, exactly, like, the people not realise that, like, what? When people were going on Twitter going, oh, Scotland should just roll over, like, are you dumb? Respectfully, like, really?
That would happen. Like, I could not imagine going and playing football and doing anything but trying to win. Exactly. Like, you can't just throw a game because you might qualify for the Olympics. It just makes no sense to me. And I think England's biggest problem was that they kind of left it out of their hands, basically. Yeah. They did all they could, but then they were still waiting to see what the other result was, basically. They should have done more, like you say, Emily, in the early games, and they didn't. And whilst they picked up in the second half of the kind of Nations League, they dropped points early on, and at the end of the day, that was their downfall. They didn't do enough in those early games, and it's football. Do they deserve to be there? Yes. Do Netherlands deserve to be there? Also, yes. But at the end of the day, only one team can go through. So it really did go down literally to the last second, pretty much.
Oh, it was awful, because I had literally about to file going, 6-0 emphatic victory seals England's place. And then me and Soph Downey were sat next to each other. And obviously the players are all gathered around watching it on their phone. Obviously they were a minute or two behind. I'm literally about to file and send off my match report. And they go, oh my God, they've scored. And it was like, I actually thought, like, oh, this is a funny, they've scored. No, they've scored. And it was like, oh my God, like I had to rewrite about 500 words because everything had been generated towards England winning, and that they still won, but they lost. And as a journalist, it's the most complicated thing to try and explain in a set amount of words. Of being like, it was
how do you
brilliant football, but it
battered?
wasn't enough. And then trying to explain the Netherlands game that you didn't watch and all of the parameters around that in the same up. Never again. No.
I was just say because of the amount of journalists I speak to these days, every time a late goal goes in, I always think, oh, that's going to annoy some journalists if I could change the report now, especially obviously with United last season, how many late goals we scored. I was just messaging journalists, oh, sorry for that. Rachel Williams has ruined your match report again.
Rachel Williams is the bane of my life at times. The amount of times that I have filed on 80 minutes and she scored in the 98th minute, or like I've had to file on 95 minutes and 96 she scored. It's like, can you just give me a heads up that she's going to do that? And I'll be like, wait, I'm not going to file. She's going to score.
Yeah, it certainly was an interesting night to watch. Obviously, as you mentioned, obviously Sweden there as well. Just a couple of the comments. JJ, I agree with you. For me personally, the Olympics for me is a bigger event than football. I watch it. I'll go watch the cycling, the rowing, the swimming. These are things I'll never ever watch. And then the Olympics comes around, and I'll be glued to the TV watching every single heat and every qualifier for all of it. TJ, I hear your point in terms of the Olympics is a much bigger deal out of it. Again, I think I go back to the point I just said. I think as an event, yes, it's bigger than maybe the Euros and so on. But as a footballing spectacle, I don't think so. I don't think football in the Olympics is it's great. You win the gold medal, obviously silver, bronze, whatever. But I think if you asked Europeans what they'd rather win, I think most would probably say the Euros. So I think it probably stands out a little bit more. And just quickly on Emily, what you were just saying about the rankings, obviously you were talking about obviously dropping down to League B and so on. What's going to happen to Sweden? They are currently ranked number 1. Are they going to, and they could potentially drop into into the League B, which is mental.
It's really flawed because obviously FIFA rankings are separate. So like the UEFA rankings, how they're going to do it now, I don't fully understand it. And no one really seems to understand how they're now going to divvy up their own rankings. It's like they've thrown their ranking system out the window for the Nations League. But then how are you going to, like now, England essentially under the ranking system, let's say like what it was before, UEFA had them ordered. Now England will drop down because they've lost games and obviously they placed second in the group. But then so did 3 other teams. So how are they then dividing that up? Are they then putting, because they scored X amount of goals or they lost by 1 on goal difference, like are they ahead? So then everything comes down to singular match margins. Whereas the whole point of a ranking system was an overall picture that every little element made sense so that the rankings were relatively fair. That if you had a bad string of games, it could affect it. But realistically, like USA lost, 4 or 5 games, got knocked out of the World Cup, but it didn't really affect their FIFA ranking. Like that's how it's supposed to be. And now with UEFA, it's not the same. So for me, it seems really pointless. I mean, I've thought the Nations League is quite pointless for a while. However, it is what it is.
It's certainly here to stay, unfortunately, I think, on that one. I don't pay much attention to rankings. You only have to look at the men's rankings. Belgium are 4th, and they're nowhere near one of the best teams around. So, yeah, it is on that one. Just to round this one off, then, obviously, we'll talk about a little obviously about. I just want to ask Emily in terms of how she's viewed United this season, because she was on the season preview. Didn't have United in the top 3, which, to be fair, as the season is going on, I'll save my comment for a later show on that one. Emily, how have you seen United this season? Obviously, and I guess a 3-part question almost. How have you viewed United this season? Marriott situation, obviously, as we're getting close to January, and what do you think United need to do in January? Because we've got quite a few injuries now starting to stack up.
I always think and we saw it a bit with Villa, that you could have a really good run one season and the next season it's not as positive. I was skeptical coming into this season simply based on I wasn't entirely sure how much the growth was sustainable without Onabaje, without Alessia Russo and yada yada. And I think some of the reservations I had as to why I ranked them lower have been have completely changed my mind. Certain things and how they've orchestrated this season has been interesting, because I obviously wouldn't have thought they rebounded as good as they have done in some respects. But I do think there is a problem with the overall cohesion of the team. Things don't seem to be clicking. For me, obviously I don't know a lot of in terms of kind of behind the scenesy stuff and kind of how things are on and off pitch with United. I kind of just get what I get in terms of what I get told and then what I watch. And what I see is kind of body language. They're sunken. They don't seem like a team that have a lot of fight left. And this early on in the season, it seems really interesting to not see that, because they still have everything to play for. Yes, they've dropped points, but by no means are they down the bottom of the table with no hope of getting in the top three. You know, they're in a not the best position, but they're in a good place. And I just think it seems really deflated already. And I'm not entirely sure why. I mean, I can guess. But I think that's one thing that worries me, that if their body language is reflective of how they're feeling, is this going to affect them to be able to sustain some sort of winning run or winning streak going into the rest of the season? And so I don't really know what's happened. So I don't really know how you then fix that, because I don't know if it's, have they lost trust in Skinner? Are there are a lot more problems behind the scenes than we know of? Like, there's so many caveats to it, but I do think there's been it's a bit like Wiegman, there's been a categorical lack of rotation. So you know what works, and then when certain players are injured or when things don't go right, there's a lack of knowing what to do to change things up again. And I think, yeah, like comments of saying, like, a lot of outgoings changes things. The dressing room will have been affected by that. And I just don't know really what you do to pick it up again. I think if it is that the dressing room has been as affected as it is, there's nothing really that you're going to be able to do to change that unless you completely change the environment. And I don't think midway through a season that's going to happen overnight. So I don't really know, in all honesty. But I do think if they can get some sort of, I wouldn't say cohesion is so much like the important thing, but getting some sort of understanding of what they're going to be able to do on pitch to be able to climb back up the table and rival Chelsea and Arsenal and Man City and Liverpool and Spurs in 5th and 6th. Like, there's points to be won, and if they can figure it out to make sure they're not dropping any more points, they have just as much chance of reaching top 3 as anyone. But I am a little bit worried that dropping points how they have done so far this season already, if every team around them goes on a winning streak and they can't seem to find that form, do they get left behind? Arguably, yes. So it's a really give or take. I think January is going to be really, really important for them. I think they need to bring in players, not necessarily based on skill, but also personality. I think you've got to look at the type of players you're bringing in. Can they gel with the team? Can they get on with the team? Can they fit in with the vibe of the team? And as much as like you want top players, if the player is completely different to everyone else on the team in terms of personality, how are they going to fit in? So I think you've got to look at an overall player rather than so much you need a specific technical thing, which is a little bit unconventional. But I think right now with the place United are in, that's where their focus should be. But yeah, I think they need some reinforcements. I think injuries have been a problem, but I also think they need to be able to rotate. And I just haven't seen. There's obviously been more rotation recently, but the rotation seems sporadic and never really seems fully thought out. It seems more like it's forced. Like someone's picked up a knock, okay, we rotate. Rather than it being, let's rotate and try this out because this is a game where we could get points or we could drop points. So let's try something that we need to preserve points. Like, preserve points? Is that what I meant to say? I don't know. But you know what I mean. So, I don't know.
It's interesting you say that about rotation. We spoke about this a lot on this channel. I actually think we've done too much. And I think I said this on a number of shows. I think Mark Skinner's experimenting too much this season with different systems. Jade at right wing, Leah's been pushed to left back in the derby. There's just been too many experiments this season. The midfield's been changed God knows how many times. Now it seems to be Zell and Miyazawa too. Now Miyazawa's picked up a knock. Obviously, we're waiting for official confirmation as to what that is. That didn't look great. So there's just injuries are killing us, which is not an excuse because clubs last season had a lot of injuries and we kept saying that to them. You can't use that as an excuse, so I'm not sat here saying that. I agree with you, Sporty, in regards to January. I think we will, but I wouldn't get your hopes upon a permanent deal. But I think we will get a fullback in. We have to because we don't have any currently. We've got Hannah and Jade, and that is it. So
I think it would be interesting, obviously, like with the centre-back situation, obviously Letizier's been played at right back, and obviously Serena Wiegmann sees Letizier as a right back. I would be really interested to see if there's a way in which to use her skills as a fullback. But obviously central defence is the problem. There's less reinforcements to do that. So I almost think like even if you could bring in another centre back and push Letizia out into a fullback role, that might make a big difference. Like obviously it's things that you've got to try, and I think Skinner's been a little bit alien to trying new things in the past. I think if you can get over that and kind of switch things up just a little bit, then we'll see. But I also think that it's gone completely out of my head. Goalkeeper rotation, depending on obviously if Earps leaves in January, if Earps leaves in the summer. I think Fallon has proven that she is a class goalkeeper. I've been really impressed with her. I think you've got to start playing her more. I think you've got to give her game time. And I understand it takes a little bit to get used to a new league, a new club, but I do think you've just got to start giving her a bit more game time. Give her a bit of chances. She should, in my opinion, should have played in the Bristol game. I think I would have put her in Bristol. I can't actually remember United's run of games the next 3 before Christmas.
We've got Spurs, Leicester in the Conti, then Liverpool at home.
Try against Liverpool. Like I know Liverpool have been in good form, but like you got to start giving a responsibility to step up to, and especially like if you are gonna, lose Earps at any point in the near future, having another goalkeeper that has had a bit of time to embed is perfect, because then you need her to step up in those games. The last thing you want is she's only played Conti Cup, Earps ends up leaving in January, and then you're left with either a keeper that has barely played WSL football, or you bring in someone new that hasn't played WSL football at all, and you're like, okay, these are options. So,
and especially, and I've been saying this on this show for a number of times, that everyone knows my opinion on it, but our first game back after the winter break is Chelsea away, which is the hardest game you are going to get in the WSL. And if we're just going to say to Fallon, you're not playing until then, there you go.
Yeah.
If Mary does go in Jan, there's your first game, Fallon. Stop that Chelsea front line. It's like with a back four that you've not played, which she's played in the Conti Cup, but it's been a rotated back line. We've seen Evans in there, and we've seen different fullback pairing. That's not the WSL. I call it the WSL back four and the Conti Cup back four. She needs to get used to the WSL one, because if she is going to be playing Chelsea and then City away 3 days later in the Conti as well, she's got to be ready.
I think it's that element of forward planning that I think some clubs do really well, like Chelsea, and some clubs do less well. And I think it's a learning curve. Like obviously Manchester United are probably still one of the younger clubs in the WSL, so it takes time to get used to those sorts of things. And maybe it's a Skinner trait, I don't know, but I think kind of having that ability to kind of take risks will pay off. And I think you almost just have to bite the bullet and do it and just see what happens. Like, okay, if you'd done it earlier on in the season, if you dropped points by testing new things, at least you know what doesn't work. Whereas like now it's a little bit more, the situation has more jeopardy, so it's hard to take those risks. But it's all kind of, I'm not a manager, so I might be chatting absolute donkeys, but from my experience with working with managers, I think taking risks at times is needed. And I do think that the best option going forward in this 3-game kind of short window between now and Christmas, change things up, do what you can do, and just see what happens.
Yeah, I think it's a good time to do it. The games we've got, whilst all games are hard, we're not playing like Chelsea, City right now. Like Conner kind of mentioned, we've got to get Fallon in goal. Earps is going at some point, probably in January, let's face it. What are you going to do? Her first game, chuck her in against Chelsea away, sound. If you've got to put her in goal sometime soon, just do it. Just get it over and done with. My issue with kind of the way that things have been rotated is that the players are coming out and they just do not look like they know what they're doing. The way they interact with each other, it is literally like they've turned up to LSV or Old Trafford, wherever. They've turned up, and in the change rooms before the game, Mark Skinner's turned around and gone, ignore everything we did in training this week. Like, you're all going in different places. The wingers are going to be inverted. Galton's going left back. Figure it out there. You'll be fine. Like, I have no issue with mixing things up, trying new things, but you have got to go through it at training. And you cannot even attempt it if any of the players are unsure what they're doing. And that is just, I mean, I might be completely wrong, but looking at it, that is just the vibe I get. The way the players react to kind of one another, the way they interact, you know, they don't know where each other are going to be. You can see someone will make a pass and that their player isn't there, and then they're turning around, and it kind of goes back to this bit of blame culture and the way they kind of are interacting with each other. It's not working. It's not gelling. So something's not going right in training for me. You know, if you can't rotate properly, then you're going to have to go back to basics, get everyone settled where they need to be, and then start again. But for me, I just get this impression that I don't know what they're doing in training, but whatever they're doing in training is not the same as what they're being told to on Sunday, I swear.
I was going to say there's a whole. We'll see how we come out on Sunday against Spurs away. Before we wrap this one, there's a couple of very quick questions. Nobody knows, to be honest. I think she's. I don't know. Is the honest answer? I would love to give you an answer, but I don't think we know. It was a knee again, wasn't it? So, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we just don't see it for a while. And yeah, I agree. It's always Aoife's knees, isn't it? It's a shame because she's a really good defender and I really like her, but it's somebody you can't particularly rely on at the moment. I believe, and Emily might be a better place. I think it's the 1st or the 31st, isn't it?
Yeah, 1st of January opens until the 31st of January. So you have essentially a month long, and obviously free agency can be done ahead of that, but likely at the moment things will be left until the start of January. But yeah.
There we are. And the final kind of question, Emily, Sporty, I'll leave it with you because he's directed this one straight to you. Based on last season's performance, do you think Mark Skinner is under pressure to win silverware this season? Obviously, we're already out of one, the Champions League. The Conti Cup's looking pretty good so far, 2 out of 2. Obviously, the FA Cup's not kick-started yet, and we are not winning the WSL, I don't think, with the form of other sides. But yeah, do you think Mark Skinner is under pressure? Obviously, it's his last year of his contract as well. Like that, he's obviously out next summer as well. What do you reckon on that one?
I think managers are always under pressure to win. That's essentially their job. And I think it's one of those really interesting situations that because he had such a good season last season, such a good run last season, that yes, I think the expectation is there to have built on that this season. And I think because it's been a lackluster start in the WSL, the focus now essentially would be on the Conti Cup and the FA Cup in terms of those are now, but they're clean slates, have not started yet. Apart from the Conti Cup, but you know, in terms of like the knockouts and whatnot, like it is a viable place to come back from, and it's easy to essentially progress and do more in those. And I think if you're looking at it and go, actually, now getting and winning WSL is harder, you do focus on the Conti Cup and the FA Cup because winning those isn't easy. You know, it's very different to the league. But it's not like you walk in and you could win it like that. Like we saw how difficult, how hard essentially Arsenal and City, etc., Chelsea have had to fight to get those trophies in the past. So I think now, yes, and I think with his contract coming to an end, it is probably like he would need to win something. I think it's similar with a few. I think Gareth Taylor's in a similar boat. Obviously, I know you're excited about signing a new contract, but I think at the same time, the pressure is there. He needs to be winning. Like, these are top sides that cannot be, not rolling over, but it can't be being made too easy for someone like Chelsea to be winning everything. So I think with his contract coming to an end, I actually think if last season hadn't have gone as well as it did in terms of United finishing second, I think he would have been under a lot more pressure going into this season. If last season was lackluster, I think he would have been under a lot of pressure. I think last season slightly lifted the valve, so he's got a little bit more wiggle room. But I do think with the form United have the potential to be in and the form that they're in now, I would say, yeah, the pressure is on. And I think something needs to start clicking into gear and they need to start motoring. Otherwise, I think you have to start directing questions at the manager because, execution is one thing on pitch, but then you strip that back and you've got tactics, you've got everything else. Then you have questions to be asked of who's in charge. And I think, yeah, if he doesn't manage to pull anything out of the bag this season, do I think he'll get a new contract next season? No. Simple.
Yeah, the more this season goes on, the more I'm leaning to agree with you there.
But there's on the flip side, there isn't a massive pool of managers who know women's football that can do it really well. I do think essentially one of the biggest factors that I haven't seen people speak about so much this season is losing Martin Ho, and how actually massively that's impact not only on pitch decisions, but the dressing room. I would be surprised if that hasn't played an impact, because obviously with managers, you usually have like the manager hat, and then you'll have someone that's more of like the people person and someone that kind of everyone can go to and has a little bit more of a chiller relationship with, like Arsenal kind of
thing. Like you've got that's maybe a little bit more approachable, someone that isn't going to be quite so like critical or take things seriously, because a manager has to take things seriously. So it's like that.
It's one of the reasons that Arsenal was so intent on bringing Kelly Smith back in. Obviously, she's very, very knowledgeable on football, but she's very much a people person. She can talk to people. She can have those conversations. So I think when you lose someone that's that important to a team, it has a massive impact. So I think, and a couple of those like kind of questions of who would step into that job, like we're seeing it now with Chelsea looking for a new manager. There's not a massive pool of managers to go from that have experience, that understand women's football, that understand the WSL, that would want to come back to the WSL. Like we've seen other managers that have gone off into the NWSL and loved it. Like I don't see them coming back. You know, we've got the likes of Laura Harvey, Casey Stoney. Would they potentially come back for a WSL managerial role? I don't know, but I think we're really quick to say, oh, manager out. But actually, you look at the options to bring in another manager, and it's not like there's 100 of them lining up at the door with their CVs ready. So I think it's one of those that maybe in terms of, let's say you end this season in third, you don't win silverware, but just keeping him for an extra year, give you time to bed in and find a better manager, probably. But I don't know. It's one of those that I don't think leaving... making rash decisions is smart, but then again, like I don't know, you know, clubs will make decisions based on smallest of margins, and realistically, he could lose the next 3 games and be gone by January if that's what the club decide. I don't think it will happen, but you know, no one really knows how these things go.
Yeah, I think it's certainly going to be an interesting time. It's interesting you mentioned Martin. We have got a show coming out on this in probably the next kind of couple of weeks, but it's something we've been, and I think it was Barry that said on this channel a few weeks ago that Martin's actually a bigger loss than honour. And I agree. I think from what I hear from people around, from certain people around United, that Martin was that person, you know, leading the coaching sessions, got on very well with a lot of the players. And I think we've lost that. And I don't think it's any coincidence that we had one of the best defences in Europe last season. Now we're leaking goals all over the place. Martin's gone, and the team that he's gone to are now keeping clean sheets and are very, very well set up defensively. So I don't think that's any surprise when we're seeing that as well. So we shall see. Hopefully, results start to improve. We're not had an awful start, but it's certainly been shaky. We can't afford any more draws to teams that have finished below us last season, because that was the one thing we were good at last season.
I am interested to see how this international break affects the last little bit of this part of the season, because we saw it with certain teams after the last break that it came at the perfect time, and for some teams it came at the worst time. And I actually don't know now whether this break is going to have it. Obviously, it's really weird and very disjointed to kind of do international break and then play 3 games, then play Christmas to have Christmas and that break, the winter break. So I feel like it's going to be really telling how this 3 games goes, the 2 WSL and the Conti Cup games go for teams, because it could be a really big decider, it being in this like little pocket of itself in terms of how the trajectory of the season goes. So we'll see. But yeah.
We certainly will. So 3 games to look forward to. On that, I'll come back to shouting out the organised stuff in a second. Emily, is there anything you want to shout out while you've been on? You've been great to have on the channel. I said to Jeff, if you saw me laughing, by the way, about 5 minutes ago, I will out myself as to why I was sniggering away there. So me and Jess were chatting briefly, and we were like, we'll make this show 30 minutes, 45 minutes, it'll be fine. And that's actually what I said to Emily when I asked her on. And here we are 90 minutes later, and there's still loads of you watching as well. I appreciate that, by the way, that you are still watching, because United Men kicked off about 20 minutes ago. And to be fair, I'm not surprised you probably don't want to watch them right now. I don't either. But, yeah, so I appreciate everyone still watching. Obviously, yourself, Emily, for joining us. Is there anything you want to shout out while you're here? Obviously, I know you do a lot of your journalist stuff as well, and just anything on there. And you, like you said earlier, you were front-facing camera this time on 90 Minutes as well, which is something new. I quite like that.
My job is behind the camera. That's where I like to be. No, I love talking. You could tell. But no, it's one of those that's like, it's really enjoyable to come and talk about football and talk about it in a really positive way and kind of chat about it in a nice way. And apologies for swearing. That's my. But yeah, no, it's just nice to come on and chat about football. I'm surprised no one mentioned my Christmas dinosaur.
I know, we were so hyped about that pre-show as well.
I was like, I'm going to turn him on. It's going to be great. No one cares about the Christmas dinosaur. But okay. Yeah, no, Twitter is where you can see most of my ramblings on stuff. I've gotten into like putting threads together. That's very odd for me, but I've been doing it recently and I've been getting quite a lot of that. So if you want long threads about really kind of stuff that is broken down into bite-sized bits, then I do that sometimes.
I do, so please carry on, because I was literally to Conner earlier. I was like, I've been all over Emily's Twitter all day trying to understand what's going on with these like new league changes. Like honestly, I must have searched you on about 4 different devices today so I could like try and learn what's going on, and I was still a bit like, I'm confused. So please carry on and like dumb it down for people like me that simply cannot understand anything at all.
To be fair, I looked at the government. Obviously, we get it under embargo, and I looked at it, and I was like, "Oh, it's like a 20-page document," and I was like, "Oh my Jesus! Like, I don't want to go through this. I don't want to. Like, this is so convoluted." And I basically picked out a top line and went, "Here you go. Here's the top line. How many words do you want on it?" And didn't really touch the rest of it. And then thought, "Oh, I'm going to put myself through loads of pain, go through the entire document, and pick out the most important points, and then put it together in a tweet." Why I did that, I don't know, but
I appreciate it anyway. So thank you. It saves me going through the document.
True.
Exactly. So make sure you're following Emily on that front to see all of those kind of things. It's definitely worth it. Scott McTominay's just scored for the men, which is great, especially as a Scottish as well, which is repping the Scots who are going to be at the Euros next year in Germany, which is great. If you follow the men's side as well. From this channel's point of view, we'll be back on Friday, obviously previewing Spurs. We've got a Spurs one on for that one, discussing that and hopefully how we talk about how we're going to beat them, because Spurs always been a little bit tricky for us, and in recent years, I didn't like my trip to the Hive a couple of years ago when they scored in the 95th minute or whatever it was, that long free kick to the back post.
Probably going to make it worse, but I don't know if you know, Beth England did feature in a friendly during the international break, so her fitness is, I don't know if she's fit to start, I don't know if she's fit to play in the WSL, but she is back on a pitch kicking a ball, which may not be the nicest thing that Man United fans want to hear. So sorry to be bad news.
It's fine. We can beat them regardless. It doesn't matter.
True. If you haven't got Drew Spence, then I would say you have a very good chance, because Drew Spence is a massive part of that engine room. So
they're not going to have Grace Clinton though, which is very good, obviously, because she is on loan from us as well, so cannot play in this fixture, which is a big help to us because she's absolutely smashing it at Spurs at the moment as well. Martha Thomas can play though, so we'll keep an eye out for her. So we'll be back on Friday for that one. Obviously, most of us will be at the game on Sunday, so there'll be a little mini vlog, I'm sure, from that one, and match reaction back on Monday. Right, we've been going for 90 minutes. Half an hour show, Jess? Half an hour. Never believe me when I say that. It never is. Make sure you're liking the video, subscribing, all of that stuff. Following Emily, Jess, and at allforunitedvids on Twitter. And we shall see you guys on Friday.